Jesus, Vanilla, welcome to my sneaky garden. We don't have Bao in the sauna today, but we're disorganized. Here's some wine, green wine. Big kiss. So, Deacon, feedback for your video. It's awesome. And I want to play DAO and money games with your Discord. Anybody else got something to say?
Go into that a little more, and maybe we'll probably be doing it either tomorrow or maybe early next week or sometime next week. We're gonna just kind of reorganize our Discord. Our Discord is kind of legacy set up for a really small team that was working on things. But as we're growing our community, we want to involve them more. And instead of dumping a bunch of money on the LPs, we kind of made a decision to put more money into the community. So there's going to be ways to contribute, earn some tip money, get involved with the core team. We want to create that kind of road from an external edge community member to being more core. So it'll be cool. There's going to be several kind of choose your own adventure tracks on how to get involved. If you want to just learn, there's that. There's going to be a bunch of ecosystem DAOs that will be getting like streams of house that you can participate in. So, yeah, it'll be cool.
That's very interesting. And finally, we arrive at the place where the professional life becomes a big choose your own adventure that is actually rewarded and like predictable and profitable, dependable, etc. Niran, are you there?
I am here. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hello.
What's up, Niran?
Very happy to have you, though. Huh? We are talking about Federated DAOs today, if you didn't read my tweets. And I want to invite Niran to give us a short primer on how do you get Federated DAOs, right?
Absolutely. So basically, Federated DAOs are the way that DAOs work together to amplify their power. So people are familiar with a lot of the DAOs in the space. It's like, how do we get these individuals to coordinate to do something they couldn't do before? In Vitalik's early writings on DAOs, it's like, hey, you can think of the Bitcoin network as a DAO. You organized all these miners to produce this blockchain, and it's really cool. And then on-chain DAOs like the DAOhaus DAOs, you're getting all these individuals to work together. But this new phenomenon that's starting to happen is we're using similar tools and similar mechanisms to get groups to work together rather than just individuals. First, you can think of Uberhouse, which is how the DAOhaus DAOs work together. It's not just individuals making DAOhaus work, it's communities coming together to make it work. Prime DAO has all these different DAO to DAO relationships with different kinds of DeFi protocols out there. It's not just about individuals coming together to advance DeFi. It's about different communities coming together to advance DeFi. And Panvala, the project I work on, isn't just about individual people trying to get more funding for what they do. It's about many communities coming together to get as many resources driven back into their communities instead of having companies give those resources to Google and Facebook to get customers in the door. So it's really about joining forces between communities rather than individuals, and DAOs that are structured in that way.
Yeah, that's...
Yes, and this is quite new, right?
So it's fairly new. Yeah, so like it depends how you define it. So like there's been different efforts in this for a while. Like to me, this is what I've been trying to do with DAOs for a long time, but I don't think it's really taken hold until this recent push with Prime DAO, with Uberhouse, like seeing these things launch, seeing more of what DAOs can be, it's kind of cracking people's brains open so they can see more of what's actually possible here. For some real world examples, like in the world of like nations help individual citizens work together, right? But then they have all these international organizations that help countries work together. You have the United Nations, you have the International Monetary Fund, You have all sorts of intergovernmental organizations, and that's the kind of space that I think can be created in the DAO world. In the sports world, there's all these like sports leagues where like individual players are coming together to work together, and they also have international like federations of sports things. You have like FIBA, you have FIFA, you have the International Olympic Committee, and that helps multiple different leagues, multiple different organizations work together on a grander scale to get more done. So that's the kind of space that I see opening up in the DAO world. We have all these DAOs forming. How do DAOs cooperate? It's things like Prime DAO's DAO to DAO interactions. It's things like Uber House bringing together the communities that are using its tools to govern the tool itself. And it seems like Panvala bringing communities together to amplify their power, because the stronger their network, the stronger their ability to cooperate, rather than having each community be on its own.
Yeah, it's exciting for me because it brings an element of representation for the entire DAO movement. So it's a meta-layer coordination. In the activism sectors in Brazil, we used to say that visibility is a right that fires other rights. And I think like last few months, seeing how the whole sustainability of proof of work and some other runaway topics around the crypto sphere have they have had a runaway effect that we don't have control over. The conversation is so shallow and sometimes just flat misguided. This might be one of the ways that we can actually be able to have a coin in there to be part of the conversation, because nobody's coming to ask us anything. I haven't seen one of the true DAO people at CNN like answering questions yet, or I don't know if we want that to happen, but
Yeah.
Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Go ahead.
I was going to say that there was one of our community members. Their name is Aren't We All, and they wrote a really interesting piece making another analogy. I really liked your analogy of the nations, and they kind of dive into this idea a little more on what that means. And the analogy that they made in that was a single player versus multiplayer, where like a DAO as a player, everyone's kind of focused internally right now on their DAO and their DAO operations. But if we get into this multiplayer world where it's like, okay, we're going to be interacting with other DAOs and really kind of building this like shadow nation up. It's kind of interesting, like nation of nations and a federation of nations.
Absolutely. Like one thing that we talk about a lot is how DAOs are this like extremely powerful tool to organize people, efforts, etc. And I believe it to the core of my being. But when I look out on what we're doing out there, that does not look like the outcome of the most powerful tool to organize people. We are not done. We have not scratched the surface. Most of what we do is all talk, I would say, but we're not done. The tools are extremely powerful, but we have to use them. We have to actually be extremely organized. When people have questions about what's going on in the DAO world and they see a mess while we're saying, oh yeah, tools for coordination, nobody's going to believe us. But when our work here is done, especially with more of these federated DAOs, people are going to look at the DAO space and they're going to be like, these people organized from their bedrooms. Some of them didn't even put on real work clothes. They're in their pajamas coordinating people across the world. That's the evidence of the most powerful tool to organize people that's ever invented. And we're going to
confirm. Am in my bedroom in sweatpants.
I'm gonna go put a suit on just because I think you're all a bunch of hippies.
Yeah, I'm actually wearing pants, so but I'm working on my video, so you don't know.
Proof of pants.
Proof of pants. That could be another DAO. Like with the analogy towards nations, like a DAO it's kind of an interesting place. I mean, really, a DAO could be anything, more like a company, or more like a nation, or more like a club of people just hanging out. But You know, what about like getting into like ideas of like nationalism or something? There you go, Felipe. Nice.
Wait, getting into what?
I'm going really deep right away, but like nationalism inside of a DAO. So now I was kind of thinking about this because it's not necessarily like nationalism, like say inside of DAOhaus or a single DAOhaus DAO, or even at the level of Uber House, but it's more like, we're holding ourselves to a certain standard to have things on chain, transparent, global, kind of national but borderless. Like, should we hold the people we work with to that same standard? If you're dealing with traditional organizations, is it something that we need to be like, no, why aren't you a DAO? Like, this is important. You need to DAO up, kind of things. I don't know. It was just an idea I was thinking.
Back in the day in DAO Stack, there was a contact from the UN considering it. There was a grant DAO from the UN. It never came through, and I think the space wasn't ready back then. And I think these federated DAOs might be the correct instrument to start some, I hate using this word, but lobbying, but let's call it representation initiatives that can send emissaries that can maybe be able to speak at that level. And I think this is happening in Portugal. There's a group working on this. I can't divulge much because I haven't met them yet, but it's definitely where I think I wanna be. Also, what's happening in Curacao with Colectivo, which is a project dedicated to creating community currencies in the island of Curacao and bringing monetary sovereignty to the island of Curacao, which has been under the thumb of a controlling ex-colonial power of the Netherlands. Like, these conversations are important, and I think I'm all for politicizing the DAO space a little bit, at least.
I feel like the question you're asking there, Deacon, is kind of like, when you mentioned like transparency, on-chain goes with that, but there are all these kinds of, what would we call them, values, right? I guess that we do all share just by nature of being in a DAO. And I feel like the question you're asking is like, should we hold the people that we collaborate with, or the groups that we collaborate, if we're talking about federated DAOs, like, should we hold them to that standard? And I think it really does come down to, it's a question of like, should we work with people who are aligned with our values or not, kind of question. And I think there's probably use cases around both. But yeah, I would advocate for, trying to suggest that, because, there's definitely a thing there, like in a DAO in general, like if money is going to a DAO and it's a DAO and that the members of that DAO have power over that money that you're sending, how it gets spent and those types of things, that's a different kind of agreement than like sending some funds to a nonprofit, for example, that's not a DAO, and you don't know where that money's going, and there is no transparency, and there is all these different things, right? So there is definitely a reason I could see for not saying that it would have to be like a hard cutoff, like we're not going to collaborate with anybody who's not a DAO. But I definitely think that there's a reason to encourage collaborations with DAOs only because of that, because you don't know where, you just have more, they're sharing the same values of transparency and all those different things that the community itself is holding itself to. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think something for us to consider, as we're building this space, because it's up to us to build it, right? And this kind of collaboration is really important for that. So, if there's a service provider DAO that offers the service that we need, that's the first place to go look. It's not to go look for the best price with someone in some agency or whatever in meat space. First we go to our partners in crime, right?
Right, and that's another angle, right? Trying to keep the value created inside of a similar mechanism or something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's when the value stays inside of it, and is just passing around inside of our little economy. The value, it boosts itself. It amplifies itself.
There's a chance for a network effect, whereas if you send it outside of the DAO network, then it can be basically lost value. That's true. Yeah, what do you think about that, Niran?
So I think it could go either way. Like I do think there's a lot to be said for keeping value flowing inside the DAO ecosystem. But there's just so many people outside the DAO ecosystem that I think there's a lot of untapped potential out there to bring people in. So it just depends how bright that line gets drawn. For me, I'm kind of a cooperation maximalist. As long as there's some way to fit in what somebody else wants to do with what I'm trying to do, like I try to not find reasons to say no. I find reasons to say yes, but it really just depends.
Yeah, I think I just kind of think about it as not certainly something to enact today, but is that a direction that we should kind of be going in? Kind of question. As those people get onboarded, as you say, we should be encouraging them. I mean, we should be encouraging them to use DAOs anyway, right? Because we think they're more transparent, we think they're more fair, we think they create more values for humans inside of those types of. The value inside of those organizations is much more shared than in a traditional organization. So, I mean, we'll just encourage that anyway, and organically, it'll probably just figure itself out.
And that being said, I think DAOs, because of their embedded transparency, they will also, in the near future, and in some cases already, allow people who don't share the same values to actually collaborate and achieve together, which is important for me. More so than having people that already agree at 85% of everything getting together.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to federated DAOs, that's a, like straight up like a DAO collaborating with one non-DAO is one thing, but like federated DAOs is like a different question, really, right? Like you kind of have to be a DAO just because of the method of coordination. It's just like if you add a non-DAO, regardless of their, what their mechanisms are, as long as it's on chain and all those different types of things, as long as you can literally interact, then it's the coordination cost is low. But if you start trying to bolt on communities that don't have that ability, then it raises the coordination cost of the whole federation, so to speak. So that is a different animal, I guess.
Yeah.
So with Panvala, like some of the communities that are part of this federation, we call it the Panvala League. There are 57 communities in it. A lot of them are DAOs, but some of them aren't. And they still need to have like an Ethereum wallet because that's how we allocate resources. Like it needs to go into an Ethereum wallet. But as far as how they're governing it internally, we care less about their internal processes and just more about what they're using the resources to do. As long as they're using it on community life, like we don't care how they govern themselves. We care that there's proof of community in some sort of way. Either they're bringing in donations or they're like holding events. Like we want to see that there's an actual community thriving and that they're using those resources to make that community thrive. But their governance, it's better if they use DAOs. The most successful communities in Panvala use DAOs, but we don't make them.
Yeah, totally.
Another thing I've been thinking about with Federation, I think we talked about this a little last time, is how membership in a DAO isn't like you can't be a member of only one DAO. You can be a member of as many DAOs as you feel like you can add value to, or you have some incentive. What's interesting about that, though, is that you get not only the like free or cheap and easy transfer of funds all around the world, you have the easy transfer of talent all around the world, and that's like seems like a unifying or
collaboration, right? That's like on a meta level, that's the ability for humanity itself to collaborate,
right? And that like.
But do you guys think everything should be DAOs? Like everything, forever, all the way down?
No,
there's no place for.
I mean, but there are cases, but I think most things that have shared purposes, in general, like I think of some of the things that should not be DAOs, or maybe don't need to be DAOs, or things that are like very, very, like think like personal tokens or things like that, like very, very like individual centric. There are things that, like musicians or whatever, like you don't want Bruce Springsteen to be a DAO. You want Bruce Springsteen to be Bruce Springsteen, right? So there are totally cases where individuals are important.
Yeah, but
anything else
the
that
thing is with those, Ben, is like a personal token or a Bruce Springsteen or whatever. They have a community of followers, and so that community actually should probably be a DAO. Maybe Bruce Springsteen shouldn't be, but maybe his band should be. I don't know. I'm a DAO maximalist.
If I was,
well, yeah, you are.
If I was a famous musician or something, I would give 1% of my revenue to a DAO to like do communications ops, whatever, merch, all these things, and it would be super successful. I feel. I mean, if somebody should call Radiohead and say, "Yo, look at this thing."
Radiohead would be a sweet DAO.
Yeah, they would quickly like, "Oh, I get it, cool."
But still, like, in that organization, like they probably still look at Tom York. They're fine with him being the CEO because he's fucking Tom York, and it's like the legitimacy, part of the legitimacy behind the whole community or whatever. Maybe that's a paradigm that'll change too, though. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I don't know. I'm a DAO maxi as I can be nationally, but I think they're. I'm open to the possibility that not everything needs to be a DAO.
I think just like
this is an interesting episode.
Thinking about traditional orgs and how they can adopt DAOs, it's a little tricky. Like, yeah, not everything like necessarily needs to be a DAO, but I think the one component that being a DAO enables is you have this on-chain identity factor, and you start establishing this reputation in an ecosystem of like immutable organizations and code. I think that has a lot of value. Neuron, I was reading the Bloom Network post you guys did maybe a month and a half ago, and my mind just went off, and I was trying to think like, oh gosh, I want to start one of these because there's a lot of like community gardens in Denver that I think could probably benefit from some sort of like cooperative structure where they have their own currency, and the customers are also have the opportunity to participate in the organization maybe in a different way that hasn't been before like possible, right? Not everybody can work in the garden on a day-to-day basis, but maybe they want to have like some participatory decision-making power over like how that organization can grow. And those are the things that I think like DAOs are especially good at solving, is like this kind of like, it's really leveraging the power of technology to create more alignment between communities or like a business and their customer, really. But that's really just the community. So those are
like what the thing that I see something like DAOhaus competing with is really lawyers. Like your community garden does not want to spend money on lawyers, but they do want a way to work together. Lawyers can solve that problem, but like if there's a dispute, you have to go to a court. And like if I'm trying to get people together to work with, and I'm thinking about what happens when things go wrong, and the answer is go to court, and it's like forget it. But DAOhaus gives another answer. When things go wrong, you rage quit, or when things go wrong, you hold a vote. Like it's cheaper than lawyers, it's easier than lawyers, it's better than lawyers. So it's kind of a no-brainer anytime you want a better option for handling disputes than a court. Courts suck. You don't want to go to a court. But if you can click a button and use a blockchain.
Right. And to your point, Val, about reputation, you're right that, within DAOs, there is another emergent property, which is the shared reputation across communities and so on and so forth, right? And because there is all that on-chain activity, like, oh man, this guy's, been pushing through like hundreds of proposals or whatever, like they're really active DAO member, like that's reputation, right? And there is value there. And I think that will be like something like, like what you said, Naron, where it's an incentive to get inside of those networks instead, because if you're not in that network, you're not building any reputation. And here are all these people doing all these things, earning reputation that can be transferred into like real value that can be extracted, in other ways. And it's so that's an incentive to get into these networks, or it will be, more so, over time.
Yeah, we have all these things where everyone's trying to figure out how to solve the Sybil resistance stuff, but it's like DAOs is actually a really good way to do that, because you get to see a transparent ledger of basically how that person has interacted inside of different communities over time. And so that, it's building a reputation, it's building an identity. So like having to add your phone number or doing like an email and a Twitter account or whatever to prove who you are may not be needed if you have some reputation inside of the DAO ecosystem.
When you have that transparency and like well-defined values, then this concept of interoperability kind of comes up. Like what is the criteria for collaboration cross DAO? And like how can you standardize, what is absolute versus what is flexible?
Yep. And
besides all the speculation, one thing that's real is that we're creating the semantically trail, right? I don't know what's going to come of it, but this has never happened before, right? And we don't have amazing ways to visualize it yet. That's one of the things I'm working on. And we also don't have as good as DAOhaus is right now in the shape the DAO space, in my opinion, so far. It's still not as delicious for some of the stuff that we have going on DeFi. So I think we still have a lot to show for it. And the ambition that Federated present might help with the push. So I think it's a very welcome initiative. And what do you guys think about this, the dichotomy between the fact that everything can be single chain, but actually it's not easily searchable, findable, definitely everywhere. And I feel we're doing relatively not a lot of effort into creating visuals from that data, in my opinion.
Yeah, we definitely talk about that a lot. Just the visualization of that information in a digestible format, basically, is what you're asking. Yeah, I think that's, super important. Will just be more important every day. Also, as more and more people use it, there's more and more people who need that information, and they need it to be clear so they can make decisions together or on their own. If they want to rage quit or vote on a proposal or whatever. So, and there's just so much data. So, that's an entire industry. Like on-chain data aggregation is that's a whole fucking industry. So many teams could be working on that for various different purposes. I'm a designer, so I think about the users interacting with this stuff. If you think about DeFi's, NFTs, and DAOs, that's like the three main, categories of blockchain activity or whatever. Of course, there's other ones, games and other things, but those. What was that?
The Trinity.
Yeah, the Trinity. Yeah, that's the Trinity. But those three different areas, require very, very different data, different complexities of data, and the data that the users want to see is different. So, and it's just so much. We have the graph to thank for nice subgraphs that we can do a lot of nice data aggregation, but it's still real heavy, man. Transparent. This level of transparency in general is just, it's a fuck ton of data, right? So and it's a blockchain, so it's not the fastest to go and get that data.
One of the issues right now is that all the data isn't on chain. You can't necessarily tell everything that a community has done through their DAO just by watching the money and how it's being transferred around. A lot of times there's a lot happening during the soft consensus periods, through Discord or through forum posts or all these things, and that stuff isn't always on chain or even in a place that can be verifiable, like IPFS. I think that may be something that we need to get better at over time.
Yeah, I think there are two approaches that can work to solve this problem. And one is like getting better at standardizing data, collecting data, making it available. The other is hiding things behind the scenes as much as possible. So if we think about the way the traditional world works, like I guess I'm a part of several corporations because I own stock and stuff, right? And I like there's reports that are required that these companies have to make by law, so they're not totally transparent, but there's information out there, and I never look at it. I never do. But if the board of directors of Disney goes rogue and I have some Disney stock, then that's when we're going to go collect all the data, organize as shareholders, and go to a court, which is basically you can think of it as a vintage blockchain, but we're going to go to a court and we're going to resolve this dispute using all that data that was there. So it's behind the scenes. I never care about it in a normal time. But when things go wrong, that's when I want to know that I can get all that data to make my dispute succeed. So I think that approach can work as well, just hiding as much behind the scenes as possible. So when there's that garden, like a community garden that's trying to put together their fund without needing to go to a court, like most of the time they're going to do the same thing I do with Disney, which is ignore the transparency. I want the transparency to be there, but I'm never going to look at it. But when there's a dispute, that community garden's going to be like, all right, let's go. All this data, we need to make sure it's there, and then resolve the dispute from there.
Yeah, that's cool. That's kind of how I think about it from the UI side too. Like, at least within DAOhaus, I don't imagine like every proposal just like filling up with like an enormous amount of data that like makes decision paralysis or whatever, right? But definitely like an area where you can go whenever you want to like extract that data and analyze that data, and whatever, like all the different things that are available on chain. And yeah, to Deacon's point, definitely need to be doing more, which we are every day. Like not us, but everybody around the whole space is working to get more and more stuff on chain. Currently, there's like gas costs with transaction, like so we can't put everything on chain because of that. Various different things. But those will get better over time. And I think the trend is, generally speaking, we do want things on chain. It's just expensive right now. That's kind of how I feel about it. But then once we do have more and more of these things on chain, and you have Discord like pumping through like Web3 pipelines and things, so we're like capturing that stuff in IPFS at least, or whatever, like however that gets. I think we'll eventually want as much stuff on chain as possible. Whenever it's applicable, some things are like, should be private or whatever for like, whatever reasons, privacy.
Yeah, so a court in your example, Neuron, would like subpoena someone for their email records or for their Discord chat. How transparent do we really need to be? I don't know.
Kind of on the
That's
same
a good
lines
question.
the scaling and the scaling and the dispute resolution is some of the themes I'm seeing now are more of these optimistic scaling solutions where you can just have off-chain voting which can be disputed, but if generally the community is working well, then I mean that's kind of how proposals work now, right? Like oftentimes you'll just get just a very few yes votes, and then everyone else, like if no one's disputing it, then not a whole lot of data actually ends up going on chain anyway. Just yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, with the off-chain and the dispute resolution, that is like one way people are going, which is kind of minimizing the on-chain transparency and then kind of falling back on some kind of dispute.
But then you lose data. You lose data over time if that happens, right?
Right, and then really you're like putting your hands in whoever the arbitrator is. I mean, it's still like, do you trust a big network of random arbitrators to decide the decision, or is it better to actually just have the decision on chain initially? It's like, well, you signed up for this contract and you didn't vote yes, or you voted no, so you're kind of held to that now. But yeah, that's harder to do when you have like an executor multi-sig role and an off-chain voting system, and then some kind of dispute resolution group that decides your fate.
I'm honestly an on-chain maximalist. I think we should go towards creating communities that can have most of everything on chain, because I think that the capacity to challenge transparently and to come together as a group to challenge, like to be a majority of minorities and to challenge assumptions that are not well reflected in a way that is trustless, and there are immediate consequences if the vote passes, changes the way the community interacts. So I think that this whole let's do everything mostly soft gov and just make one transaction to execute the conversation really tends to deafen productive conflict. And I think increasing the threshold of productive conflict is sort of the definition of driving coordination costs down.
Mm-hmm.
Having outcomes for hard conversations that are go for it. I just want to throw the wrench in the cog.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, for me, like I think that like a lot of the ways to reach consensus and have those productive conflicts, I actually think the value in the blockchain isn't about helping people reach consensus. It's about resolving disputes to me. So like I think it's like for me when I try to organize communities, it's like okay, like we do need that venue for productive conflicts. How do we want to structure that? Pretend the blockchain doesn't exist. Like if we're just a group of people, how do we want to structure our productive conflict? And then coming up with that. And then having an on-chain system to be able to like actually resolve disputes if it goes beyond that. So that's the way I think about it. Like I think the you have the most freedom to structure your venue for productive conflict if you pretend the blockchain doesn't exist and just pretend it's just people trying to figure things out. But you need the blockchain behind the scenes is what gives us that freedom. Because without the blockchain behind the scenes, it's like, well, we tried to do the soft gov thing and then somebody broke the rules and then we had no way to do anything after that. Like that sucks. Exactly. But the blockchain gives us the freedom to do softer governance. And I like that freedom.
Yeah, true that.
So the thing is, the most revolutionary, maybe I'm going to make some hyperbolic affirmations here, and I can correct myself later because this is not on the blockchain, so fuck it. The point being, maybe the major vocation of Ethereum is to flip game theory on its head and solve the prisoner's dilemma kind of a thing. Only to the extent as we're able to disseminate and visualize the information. Like in potentia doesn't solve the problem. And that's it. Especially while the access to technology is held by certain groups that have been in power for most of the time, which is like young Westerner male, the shit,
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah, it's totally just like we've been caught in one huge prisoner's dilemma for centuries, basically. So yeah.
Maybe to stray from this combo a little bit, but still about federation and DAOs. We have a lot of forces that are driving us to collaborate right now. Things like open source software, streaming talent around. But there's going to be a time when DAOs don't like each other, or DAO platforms don't like each other. Like, do DAOs go to war, right? And I mean, we've seen things like chain with these like
dispute resolution
or VC chains. Yeah. Well, like doing liquidity vampire attacks. You get kind of community vampire attacks sometimes. I mean, like, I don't know. What does that look like?
Is that kind of what's going on with Curve? Like, I haven't been following Curve too much, but didn't someone make a proposal to like enforce IP against another protocol that is using similar smart contracts, and people are like freaking out about that.
Yeah, I was just talking with Yves about this and something, but some kind of IP.
Is that like the first DAO war that we're seeing, like the first DAO war in the beginning?
Well, yeah, that's like the dispute and going to court, right? And because of the, it seems like, and it's that's almost more of an open source issue, but they're really tied together a lot. I don't know. I think they go back.
Right. For sure, and you have, yeah, and you have people like me who, you know, I intentionally go too far all the time on purpose because as soon as I go too far, someone says you went too far, and I'm like, cool, I know that's the border. Now this is our safe zone, and like sometimes, you know, I'm not, I'm
When you decide to go too far on something, can you give me a call? Come, because I haven't seen.
Oh, you've seen it. I'm just real sneaky with it, but yeah. But you know, I don't know, but yeah. So I mean, I don't go into full conflict. I'm not really anti-conflict either, but you know, but there are people who like, you know, kind of thrive in conflict, not necessarily like conflicting, but you know, finding their way out of that or solving conflicts or whatever. But yeah, I do like to go too far. Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, so if a community did something, they're like, you know, testing the ecosystem, so to speak, and they're like, and they do a thing, and then you know, everybody else around them is like, you're an asshole. Then they learned, you know, that basic, you know, so like, but if they do it, and then, you know, a majority of communities are like, we think that was like cool or whatever, then okay, you know, then that's the dispute. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. Like when you get into dispute resolution amongst like federated DAOs, I don't know. Yeah, we haven't really gotten there yet. There hasn't been like a dispute between federated DAOs yet. And but I imagine it just keeps scaling, right? Like there's some common interface that they're federated for in the first place, and they should have a manifesto and a purpose, and the dispute should tie to that somehow. So,
And also,
So I think
the border.
yeah.
Oh, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I think this is actually a really big problem. Like a lot of the vision that people have in their heads is like, hey, we have these tokens, we're going to help the world cooperate. But if we actually look at the history of what's happened, it was like, oh, we have all these tokens. We have excuses to hate people now. Bitcoiners hate everybody else. Ethereum, a lot of people hate Bitcoiners now. That wasn't the culture when I started in Ethereum, but that's the culture now. I think the default things that tokens do is divide people. So we actually have to come up with a way to avoid that problem. So like I think
token nationalism.
Yeah, token nationalism is the default, and I think it will tear our communities apart. But my hypothesis about the way forward is the thing that I think prevents that mindset is a mindset of openness to mergers. And what I mean by that is that nationalism kicks in when the narratives of two different tokens overlap. Once they overlap, when Bitcoin was digital gold and Ethereum was this programming platform, it was like, okay, not too much conflict. But when it became Bitcoin's digital gold and ETH is money, people went crazy. They went insane. So what we need to make sure happens for the new tokens that we launch is that if our narratives begin to overlap, rather than being like, we're going to crush each other, it's just like, guys, if we're trying to do the same thing, just merge. And the historical example of how this plays out is the emergence of sports leagues, especially in the United States. When you start saying, let's create a basketball league, somebody else says, let's create a basketball league.
Yep.
They're going to compete. They competed for a while, and then they're like, okay, let's just merge. That's happened. That's why you have the AFL and the AFC and the NFC and the NFL. And in all these sports leagues, you have these different conferences. It's the historical byproduct of the same process. And if we're aware of that, if we know that, okay, we're going to do our own thing, but if our narratives overlap, rather than defaulting to token nationalism, we're going to default to merging, then we won't become Bitcoiners versus Ether people. which would be terrible for what we're trying to do.
But does that end up being
Well, I have two things to say about that.
good?
Go ahead, whoever. Yeah.
No, just quickly. We can create narratives about defaulting to mergers, and also creating the systematics for which that could be achieved. And that's kind of a lot of what Prime DAO is about. It's where two parallel experiments can become one venture. It needs to be contextually navigated. That's why I've been doing this activism for facilitators since the dawn of my participation in the space. Is that there's no amount of premeditated thinking then that can lay out a
Oh, yeah,
conflict.
I think you're badly robo.
You need to contextually deal with it. Play on and the circle outcome of the conflict. I'm robo. All right, so the NSA doesn't want you to hear my thoughts, and I'll just keep them.
Oh, now you're fine. What's up?
Once you stop talking about the important stuff.
Told you.
Can you try TLDR?
Context. Navigation of context will trump a priori understandings of what should happen. There's no should. When politics, no should.
And mergers could be federated DAOs also, right? So like, and they can maintain their sovereignty and then have a federated DAO do something, and maybe there's a federated token or something at that point.
Yeah, the thing I worry about with the mergers is then you just end up with the one DAO to rule them all or something. Like what I would rather see is so Raid Guild is a member of Uber House, but Raid Guild could also go become a member of Bankless's hub of DAOs, or DAOhaus is a member of Panvala and a member of Uber House, and so you get a crossing of or you get those fuzzy borders like you've talked about before, where it's people have the sovereignty and their DAO has their sovereignty to do what they want.
Yeah,
Exactly. So the notions I like to throw out there is like the illusion of individuality. I often, in my most drunken, inspired conversations at dinner parties, I stout the idea that there's the illusion of personhood. It's terrible. Even as an artist, the illusion of being original,
right.
and being an author. There is a component of authoriness available, but it's not the full story. And there's a component of individuality available to you, but it's not the full story. And there's a component of identity to a community, but it's also not a full story. And also between defaulting to merger and defaulting to conflict, a loose string cannot shoot an arrow. There's such a thing as an optimal amount of conflict, right? So these creatures, these contextual navigators that I call facilitators, but whatever, diplomats, what the fuck, I don't know. You are basically a conflict DJ, right? You don't want people to sleep on the dance floor, but you also don't want the bottles, So there is an optimal amount of conflict. There's something that you can write books about it, but it won't help anybody. Skin in the game, love, listening, communication. There's no guidebook. Whenever I see a community writing guidebooks about building communities, I go like, sure, fine.
Yeah, so I think we definitely have a choice to make. It's not about merging all the DAOs and having one DAO to rule them all. But anytime there's two tokens in particular, two tokens with one narrative, guarantees conflict, guarantees token nationalism. I haven't seen anything else. So either it's one token per narrative and we merge things that end up with the same narrative, or we do the token nationalism route, which is the default. But I have no control over what happens. But those are the two paths
or something in between, right? As long as parallel communities. I had a connection problem, and I thought you had stopped. I apologize. Well,
Stop, but try turning off your video because it's
my
cutting in
point
and out.
was basically as long as they're not raising armies to annihilate each other, parallel experiments. I don't. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, don't raise armies against each other, y'all. That's not nice.
I want to introduce another angle here, which I think could be interesting and relevant potentially to House and Uber House. I really like the parallel concept of nations and kind of token economies, or I guess token communities. I think another analogy would be states versus states and token communities. If instead of each state just competing with all the other states, and by states I mean within the United States, or I guess provinces in Canada, or the equivalent in other countries. Instead of those always just competing amongst each other, if there is something above them that creates alignment across them while maintaining some level of healthy competition between them, and parallel experiments between them, I think that can be really powerful. And that is something I'm really excited to see emerge with Uber House, and potentially with the House token as sort of a measure of this higher level economy, or GDP, as we've been talking about a little bit with gross DAO. What have we been calling that? Gross DAO
Domestic
product.
Yeah.
Gross domestic product. That's right. Yeah, and House being sort of an index of many different smaller community tokens and DAO tokens within the Uber House community. So I think that's a really interesting direction for us to try to nudge Uber House towards.
That's a really good point too, about just the point that that federated DAOs happen when two parallel communities, maybe they're doing completely different things, but whenever they find that meta topic to collaborate on, in the case of Uber House, it's like these, they're just a bunch of DAOs that do, every one of them are completely different, but they have this shared goal or shared topic of, well, we're all using the DAOhaus platform, so let's govern it. They can do everything they want differently completely, and there's nothing at the meta level to stop them from doing anything they want to do. But yeah, to your point, that's the power of federated DAOs to me, is it enables it gives these communities a place to coordinate on higher level coordination thing. The meta, that's where it's at. That's like what's lacking right now, really. And even in the United States or whatever, like that's the same thing. Like states have, they're different, but they're joined in the United States, and they do have some sovereignty ish, like state rights and whatever. But it's a very different from like what if it were a federated DAO of if those states were actually like DAOs or whatever, and they were federated, they would have like full sovereignty. And if they didn't like what the United States was doing, they could rage quit and then join another federated DAO. They wouldn't want to exist on their own at that point. Once there's a bunch of federated DAOs out there, you probably don't want to exist on your own for too long, but maybe you quit and you probably do try to find another federated DAO to join, because like Yaron said earlier, it does amplify your power, obviously, like collaborating with other shared like-minded communities.
The caveat there is, imagine if there were two United Nations, or two
Yes.
International Monetary Funds, or two FIFAs, two Olympic committees. Like, the people part of one would hate the people in the other. So it's really, again, I think it's about, like, if anytime there's one narrative with multiple tokens, conflict. Just a conflict for conflict's sake, because again, we all are humans. We like to see numbers go up of the assets that we hold. And if one community is trying to do one thing with one token and the other community is trying to do the same thing with a different one, they're just gonna hate each other for no reason, like for a made up reason, and that sucks.
So does a McDonald's coin and a Burger King coin could have problems.
Exactly.
What is on your shirt?
But if they can coordinate in a like burger DAO, maybe that'll help. I think a conflict resolution approach that I really like is just default to zoom out, because I think Niran, you're really getting really well at the like the core of what creates conflict, and that's proximity. And it's focusing on the thing that like you're slightly different to somebody else in, but like basically the same, and that creates the most conflict. Neighboring countries have the most conflict. Competing companies have the most conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So if like the thing I really like about default to zoom out is you just reframe everything. And so zooming out is a way to not look at what you have different from each other, but we'll look at what you have similar to each other. And I think creating contexts under which or within which we can help potentially competing or conflicting organizations or individuals or DAOs or whatever it is, if we can help them create a space in which they can zoom out, I think that'll be helpful.
So I love that a ton, and I thought that it would work. And that's what Vitalik tried to do. It's like, hey, we're all trying to do crypto stuff. We're not trying to do your digital gold thing. We're trying to do this programming platform. And it worked only temporarily, though. So everyone who believed that zooming out would help cooperation kind of got suckered. And everybody who was like, oh, we're just saying this until we become your mortal enemy, which is what happened. Like everyone's saying ETH is money. People are competing with Bitcoin. But everybody who believed that they weren't got suckered. So I think it's inevitable that like I think zooming out is something we want to believe, but I think it doesn't work. It only works temporarily, and I'm willing to do it. But I just don't think it works.
Yeah,
I think the lesson that I would draw from that, which I think your observation is spot on. The lesson I would draw from that is we didn't create actual structures to make that happen. We tried to do it in a soft way. And I think doing it in a soft way is a great start, but there needs to be some structure behind it. I don't know exactly what that looks like. And like, obviously, like you said before, you can only zoom out so far. There's a point where there's inevitably going to be something, but creating structures to allow that to happen, I think, is what I would like to see more of.
There's more value to honest conflict than dishonest harmony. And sometimes creating the forums where this conflict can be had but managed to a productive outcome is the hidden vocation of these federated DAOs. So they're probably not going to be the most harmonious spaces where everybody knows and love each other to death. These are spaces where conflicting points of views and blind spots are going to be discovered. And we counting on 2 minutes to the end of the call, so I would like to invite everybody to make their closing statements in this here forum to sound very ceremonial and meta-DAOish. Because we have a new commitment in this here podcast, which is to finish on the hour. Just letting you guys know.
There is a website reference, like a reference website that some of us are collaborating on around the idea of federated DAOs. That's one thing. But yeah, anything else you want to throw in here?
And I think the notes from this episode are going to help that website. Come again, Vanilla?
It's close. I think
it's very close. Very close.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it still needs like one last pass. But yeah, within the next days, I'd say.
Cool. I just want to say thanks, Niran, for coming on the call. It was fun.
Definitely. Not only for coming on the call, but for the initiative of giving this a name.
No problem at all. Like, I love what DAOhaus is doing. I think a DAO platform run by the DAOs that use it is a special thing, not just because of ideology's sake, but because that connection between the users and the actual platform itself is the feedback loop that's going to make it the best DAO platform in the world. So I'm really excited to see what you guys do with it.
Spot on.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. It's 8 o'clock where I am, which is the last moment of this here house party. We got more serious today. We're talking about serious stuff. Thinking about the grand implications of the DAO movement. I'm going to think a lot today about this, and I thank you, Niran, for bringing the reflection to us. And thank Deacon, thank Ben, thank Travis, thanks everybody, thanks Vanilla, thanks my mom, thanks the asparagus I had yesterday. See you next week.
guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Bonsoir.